Hey, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Nun Zayin, which Emir Hashem will take us to the end of the parak, the capstone of this Masechta, the last Mishnah that we're learning here. In and of itself is not hard, but one of the ensuing Gemaras is quite difficult. And I know you guys loved the Gemaras about stacking Hekeshim one on top of the other. So we're going to be focusing on that just to go out on an easy note. What we know doesn't work is one Hekesh being learned from scenario A to B and then extending from B to C. But what if you're only learning partial Hekesh? And we're going to discuss that a little bit later today. It's not a full Hekesh. Then are you allowed to learn from A to B and then B to C? Or no? Does it hold the same rules of Hekesh is not allowed to be learned from Hekesh? We'll get there shortly. I'm going to start at the open of the Gemara. I think that's approximately where he finished at the bottom of, oh no, the Mishnah, sorry. Stopped at the Mishnah. Okay, great. Let's start from the Mishnah. Here we go. HaBechor v'Maiser v'Pesach kodshim kalam. The Bechor, firstborn animals. Maiser, a reference, of course, to the 10th animal, and we don't just take 10%. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The 10th one that walks through the narrow opening gets marked, and that is what's called Maiser. And the Korban Pesach, those are kodshim kalam. Shchitasan b'chol makom ba'azar. They can be shechted anywhere in the azar. V'daman ta'un matana achas. But they only need to have one blood application on the mizbeach. However, ubilvad yitain keneged hayesod. When you do the blood application on the mizbeach, it has to be above an area that has a yesod. We spoke about this extensively in the Binyamin Yehuda conversations. So what that means is that the north and west sides of the mizbeach, so let's say the heichal is over here, so the north side of the mizbeach and the west side of the mizbeach, they have a yesod at the bottom, and one amma on the east and one amma on the south has a yesod. So that, says the Mishnah, is where you need to do that one matana achas, that on the mizbeach, but above a vertical line directly facing down toward a yesod. Shina ba'achilasan, but they're different when it comes to their edibility. What does this mean? Habachor ne'echal kohanim, the firstborn animals are only edible to kohanim. V'hamaiser l'chol adam, the animal that was meiser, the animal that's a tenth that you have to give, that is edible for anyone. And both of these, the Bechor and the Meiser, v'ne'echal and Bechol ha'ir, can be eaten throughout Yerushalayim. Bechol ma'achal, they can be cooked in any way. L'shnei yomim v'layla echad. They have an expiration date of 2 days and 1 night. In contrast, HaPesach, the Korban Pesach, Einu Ne'echal Ela Balayla, it can only be eaten at night. And we draw the din of Afikomen by when we have to finish the Afikomen from these halachos, from this Mishnah actually, which is why we have this machlokes of Chatzos versus the rest of the evening, going past Chatzos. That comes from the sugya we're going to learn today. We're not learning it through a halachic lens, just through a Daf Yomi lens, but just if you're looking for a Marimokom, the conversations around when we have to finish the Afikomen are rooted in this Mishnah. Has to be eaten by midnight. We're going to discuss, is that the Rabbanan or is that the Oraisa? There has to be a chabura of people, and the people who are bichabura, they are the only ones that are allowed to eat from that korban. If I'm not part of your chabura, I can't. If you're not part of mine, you can't eat from mine. And we spoke about this extensively in Maseches Psachim. What does it mean to be roasted? It can't be it can't be partially cooked. Fine. That's what the Mishnah says. The Gemara opens 6 lines from the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Beis. Mantana, who's the author of our Mishnah? Amar Rav Chizda, Rabbi Yossi Haglilihi. Rabbi Yossi Haglili is going to be one of our main characters today, but in totally unrelated ways. Here's his first application, as we're going to see now. Titania. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, Chelbo, the pasuk doesn't say Chelbo. Chelbo lo ne'emar, ela chelbam. What is this pasuk talking about? I'll read it for you. This is Bamidbar Yud Ches Yud Zayin. It says, Ach bechor shor, o vechor kesev, o vechor eis, all of these animals which are bechor, lo sifteh, you cannot redeem them, kodeshem, as damam tizrok, damam is a plural word, al hamizbech, ve'es chelbam taktir, in the plural. It doesn't say chelbo, but chelbam. So it's bechor, plus must be other animals, it's in plural. So what is it talking about? So the Gemara is medayik. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, Chelbon lo ne'amar ela chelbam, dama lo ne'amar ela damam. And because that's true, so therefore, limed al bechor u'maiser u'pesach shetunin matan damim ve'emurin legabe mizbeach. We therefore extend all of the halachos to be similar, because bechor has an extension of the plural, chelbam and damam, and therefore we're able to extend it to other animals, and therefore the bechor, the meiser, and the pesach are grouped together. That's sugya number one, a little bit clean. Keneged hayesod minalan. How do we know that the blood applications of these korbanos have to be put directly above a base? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, remember we're talking about an Amora here, the framing here is an Amora, and Rabbi Eliezer was not an Amora, at least not to my knowledge. So Rabbi Elazar says, Asya zrika me'ola. We have a gzeira shava from the world of Ola. The Ola gufa minalan. How do we know Ola? Tichsiv al yesod mizbach ha'ola. There's a little bit of a girsa change coming up. Limed, says the Gemara. Let's find the right word here. Limed al Ola sheteuna yesod. That's the change in the Gemara according to the Shita Mikubetzes. So what do we learn about the Ola? That it needs a yesod. Imala halon, says the Gemara. Wait 1 second. You said that Keneged Hayesod is learned from Zrika from Ola, but there's a problem. Imalahalan over there, it's Shtei Matano Shein Arba. Then maybe Afkan we should say Shtei Matano Shein Arba. If you're learning from Ola, then it needs to have Shtei Matanos that are Arba. But our Mishnah says that there's only Matana Achas. Stira. Amar Abaye, Lamali Lemichtav Saviv Beola Saviv Bechatas. So he says, why do we have the word Saviv written by the pasuk by Ola and the word Saviv written by the pasuk by Chatas? What that means is that while it's true that there is what to compare from the word Zrika, which teaches us that we learn this concept of Zrika from Ola. However, we have to make sure that we know that not everything transfers. That's Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad. So the halachos by our case are going to be different. Says the Gemara, that's a great answer. Hanicha lemando amar ein malamdin. That when you have two psukim that say the same thing, that we're not malamed. Ela lemando amar malamdin ma'ika lemeimar. But according to those who say that you, even if you have two psukim that say the word saviv, you can still extend it to the third. Says the Gemara, don't worry. Have asham shlosha. According to that shita, there's another pasuk that has the word saviv, and that's the pasuk of asham. And what do we learn from there? V'shlosha vada ein malamdin. A little bit of a trick move. Why doesn't that apply to the first shita? Why don't we look at, okay, these require rishonim as to why we don't do that. That brings us to the 2 dots, 10 lines down on Nun Zayin and Aleph, with the next piece of our mission, ha-bechor ne'echal lekohanim. That the bechor is eaten by kohanim, and the Gemara here has on the side, or actually on the bottom, if I'm being more accurate, in the Hagos V'Tzionim, that you need to say the rest of it, the rest of the Mishnah. That yes, it's true, ha-bechor ne'echal kohanim, but we need the rest. V'ne'echalin b'chol ha'ir b'chol machal l'shnei b'chule. We need a longer quote, because that's what we're going to talk about. So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, minayin lebechor shenechal l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. How do we know the expiration date, that the nosar expiration date is 2 days and 1 night, like our Mishnah says? If you look back in our Mishnah, it says l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. Says the Gemara, because shene'emar uvsaram yihyelach kechazeh hatnufa uchashok hayamin. Its blood should be like the chazeh hatnufa uchashok hayamin, which is a reference to the shlamim. Hikishu akasav, the pasuk is comparing a bechor. So we see a hekesh in the pasuk between bechor and shlamim. Ma shlamim ne'echalon l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. And just like when it comes to shlamim, the expiration date is 2 days and a night. Af bechor ne'echal l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. So too by bechor. So we asked in our Mishnah, how do we know that a bechor, and by extension, it's not just a bechor, but it's also the meiser and the pesach. How do we know that they're 2 days and 1 night? It's a hekesh from the world of shlamim. Then the Gemara tells a fascinating story. It is a back and forth kind of a story, but a discussion between Tanaim. You almost feel like you're in the Beis Medrash with them. It's really quite beautiful. And let's learn that now. We're about a quarter of the way down on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. This was a question that was asked before the Chachamim Bekerem B'Yavne, in the vineyards of Yavne. Very well known. Take a look at Rashi, 15 lines down. Dibra Maschel Bekerem. Talmidei Chachamim Yoshvin Shuros Kekerem. Kach Mefurish Bebrachos Yerushalmi. This is where they get the phrase of Kerem B'Yavne. Your alma mater, no? So So what happened there? They were very masudar in the way that they sat. The Talmidim sat in perfectly straight rows, just like vineyards are planted. And that's why it was called Kerem Biavne Ada Yom Hazeh. That's what it's called 2,000 years later because of the way that they sat in that yeshiva, in that base medrash. So that
It's all straight lines.
what is?
Isn't it? All straight lines. Belvin was a little bit more round.
Octagon when we were there. They changed it now. Yeah. When I was in Shalvim, there was an octagon,
Right.
but now it's actually a different building. So yeah, now it's actually
Definitely.
yeah. Yeah. What? Today it is. Why? No? That big, long, wide base medrash? It's curved a little?
The up front and
The right and left are angled? Okay. I haven't been there in 15 years. I thought it was straight. Bad memory. Okay. So says the Gemara, Bechor. So this was the question that was asked. Bechor lekama nechal. There, the Gemara, in Keren B'Yavne, they were discussing what's the expiration date for a Bechor. Nene Reb Tarfon v'Amar. Rabbi Tarfon was sitting in the front of the room. He was the Rav. So he answers, I'll tell you, no problem at all. Happy to help. L'shnei yamim v'layla echad. I've got you. The expiration date is 2 days and a night, like our Mishnah says. But says the Gemara, Haya sham talmid echad shebala beis hamedrash lifnei chachamim tchila. There was one student who showed up in the beis medrash for the first time. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Shmo. Could you imagine? This guy sits in the back. We're like, who's the balabas in the back? You know, like who is this guy? So he's Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So the Gemara says, Amar lo Rabbi Yossi Haglili eina b'aishan lam. And he pipes up. He says, Rabbi, minayin lach. How do you know that the expiration is 2 days and a night? So Reb Tarfon is a weathered Rav, and he says, Amar lo b'ni, my son, trust me, I've got this. Shlamim kachim kalim, uvechor kachim kalim. Ma shlamim ne'echal and l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. Af bechor ne'echal l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. I got you, no problem. We have a comparison between shlamim and kachim kalim. Omar lo, third of the way down, 2 lines before the wide lines. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, Rebbe, I could argue differently. Bechor matana lekohen, v'chatos v'asha matana lekohen. I'll find you a common denominator between Bechor and something else. And if I compare a Bechor to chatos and asham, then here's what happens. Ma chatos v'asham liyom v'layla. Oh, they only get 1 day and 1 night. Perhaps af Bechor liyom v'layla. No, he's not holding back. You know, it's like a beautiful thing to see him pushing. It's beautiful. So says the Gemara, Omar lo, Rabbi Tarfon says, Nidon davar midavar, v'nilma davar midavar. We're going to learn about one thing and apply it to that thing. Really what he's trying to say is, I'll show you that my comparison to what I said earlier is a better comparison. Ma shlamim ein ba'in al chet, af bechor eino ba'al chet. You tried to compare Rabbi Yossi Haglili to an Avera. No. What are you talking about? The korban that we're dealing with, even though there's a similarity, I agree there's a similarity. There's a similarity to every korban. It's an animal. Whatever. You can make a lot of comparisons. So what is the argument of Rabbi Tarfon? Just like a shlamim has nothing to do with a chet, obviously a bechor has nothing to do with a chet, and therefore the hekesh should not be to chet. Mashlamim ne'echalim l'shneim v'layla echad af bechor ne'echal l'shneim v'layla echad. Why are you talking about a comparison that's not really worthwhile, Rabbi Yossi Haglili? But still, the Talmud is going to keep asking. He's persistent. Omar lo, Rabbi Yossi Haglili says back to Rabbi Tarfon, Rebbe, nidon davar midavar, yilamed davar midavar. I'm sorry, but I could push back and show you another way to learn, even if it's not about a chet. Chatas ve'asham, actually it is about a chet. Chatas ve'asham matana lekohen, ubechor matana lekohen. Machatas ve'asham ein bain bin neder unedava, af bechor eino ben neder unedava. It's a very interesting response the Gemara gives because it's still talking about a chet. Right? It's a little bit different, but it's not, the comparative aspect isn't about a chet, it's about the matana component. Correct. The comparison's on just a different focus. But nevertheless, because the focal point of this hekish is not about chet, therefore, 2/3 of the way down, 7 lines into the wide lines, machatas v'asham nechol yom echad, af bechor nechol yom echad. And Rabbi Yossi Haglili shut down Rabbi Tarfon. So says the Gemara, Kafat Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva stands up, then he started like Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon was uncomfortable. I was in shiur with Meir Tursky when I was in YU for a semester, Somebody asked him a question on a ritva, and he sat there for 5 minutes in dead silence trying to figure it out. He didn't have an answer. He closed the Gemara and he got up and he walked out. We picked up his shiur the next day after he figured out what the ritva meant. So it was godless. It was just it was incredible. That was the kind of person he was. Perfect integrity. I would have lied through my teeth, and I was just saying, like it was so beautiful to see. So Rabbi Tarfon was done. His lips were locked. What was he going to say? He didn't know what to say. But Rabbi Akiva did. So Rabbi Akiva is now talking. Amar lo. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, no. Harehu Omer V'Saram Yichya Lecha. Hikeshan Akasuv. We compare a bechor lechazav shok shel shlamim. That's what this pasuk seems to imply. So says the Gemara, therefore, ma shlamim nechal and shem v'layla echad, bechor nechal shem v'layla echad. So Rabbi Akiva says, I have a pasuk. My pasuk is better than any hekesh that either of you are going to make. Stop pulling from a keshem that you are making up. I have a pasuk that indicates the link between a bechor and shlamim. Amar lo, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, he kashto lechazav v'shok shel truma. When you saw the word chazav v'shok, you compared it to the chazav v'shok of truma, of a shlamim, excuse me. V'ani makisha lechazav v'shok shel toda. I saw the words chazav v'shok, but there's also chazav v'shok by a korban toda. Ma toda necheles liyom v'layla. Af bechor nechel liyom v'layla. He is going at it. He's trying to figure this out. He's pushing hard to try and get clarity here. Amar lo, Rabbi Akiva says back, no. Harehu omer uvesaram yehielach. The pasuk on the side in Bamidbar Yud Ches Psukim Yud Zayin Yud Ches has the phrase uvesaram yehielach, and then at the end of that pasuk in Yud Ches it says she'ein tamalomar lecha yiyeh. If you look in the pasuk carefully toward the end of that quotation, that last pasuk says uvesaram yehielach kechazeh atnufa uchashok hayamin lecha yiyeh. Double language. Yehielach and lecha. So it says Rabbi Akiva, umatal malomar lecha. Must be hosif akasif havaya acheres bebechor, that there must be something else that's like a bechor, or the bechor is like something else, which is the shlamim, and therefore says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva must be right. Fascinating dialogue. Omer Dorsheni, how all of this was going on. A lot of questions that we could ask, and we're not going to go through it. It's really just beautiful Gemara, just to give so much color and background as to how these conclusions developed. And it was much more nuanced than we thought. Like when we see it, we're like, okay, it's a drasha. No, this was like a whole Torah. The base medrash was rocking. They were like trying to figure this out. It was beautiful.
Don't mess with Rabbi Akiva.
Huh?
Don't mess with Rabbi Akiva.
That's for sure.
Takeaway.
Good takeaway, Eric. Don't mess with Rabbi Akiva. I agree with you.
Crazy thing is, Garbage was not that long after this book. So people knew, like, it's not like in the base of English they didn't know what to do. They had forgotten it. That's the terrifying thing. It wasn't that long. We don't know it, I'm not saying it's right, but
50, 60 years.
But it's been a long time, correct? Right? It not a long time.
Wow.
They went to Yavin, Yavin B'Chachamel. That was right after the Churban. Many Gemaras are like this. It's terrifying. How do they possibly not know?
Wow.
I mean, the answer I've heard is like, that's how bad the Churban
Is that what's happening here?
That's the bill. I mean, how much did the coin eat or not? Go find some old coin and that's, you know what I mean?
I hear you.
Maybe it's not, there may not be any.
My brain wants to say that perhaps something else is going on here. Not that they forgot. They knew the Mishnah has no machlokas in it. But perhaps the Talmud of Yossi Aglili was saying, I know we did two. I just don't understand why we did two. Why isn't it one? I don't know. I'm just reacting to your question. But either way, we know from many other places that that's true. Okay, this story of Rabbi Yossi Aglili's rebuttal to the greats of Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva was then reported over. Uchashene'emru l'Rabbi Shmuel, Uchashene'emru dvarim lifnei Rabbi Shmuel.
That's the same.
Probably.
The elder who was maybe still.
It could be. I don't know who he was. I don't know. It's hard to know.
This would be very interesting.
Yeah. We need Daniel Cantor tonight. He knows this stuff. He knows it well. So the Gemara says, when the story was repeated in front of Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Lahan, Rabbi Shmuel said, Tzu'uva Amrulo to Rabbi Akiva Ta'isa. Go over to Rabbi Akiva and say, Rabbi Akiva, you made a mistake. You didn't take Eric's advice. He went after him. He said, I disagree with you. What was the mistake that he felt that Rabbi Akiva made? So the answer is that Toda mehechan lamda mishlamim. There are already Hekeshim from Toda from the world of Shlamim. And if now you're saying that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is trying to learn from Toda to Bechor, the Chidavar Halamed Behekesh, Chozer Malamed Behekesh, Rabbi Akiva, why are you quoting the psukim of L'cha Yiyeh and Yiyeh L'cha? That's not the argument, says Rabbi Shmuel. You should have argued a Davar Halamed Behekesh that you're not allowed to be Chozer Malamed Behekesh. Toda was learned from Shlamim. Now you're trying to take Toda and learn at the Bechor. You're not allowed to do that. That should have been Rabbi Akiva's answer. So says the Gemara, Ha'ein alecha lidon b'lashon achron el b'lashon shlamim el b'lashon rishon. You shouldn't have learned the second language, which he tried to push you on, which was Toda. You should have just learned from the shlamim part. The whole conversation is ridiculous because the guy's wrong. We'll see soon that that's not true, because obviously Rabbi Akiva knows that we hold that you can't have a hekesh and extend to another hekesh. So we're going to soon see what that means. Says the Gemara of Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that Rabbi Akiva was wrong, and he shouldn't have quoted the pasuk of L'cha Yeh and Yihye L'cha, because after all, the whole argument should have been on the fact that the Torah was already learned from Shlamim, and that's one hekesh, and the second hekesh was from Toda to Bechor. So says Rabbi Shmuel, Hai L'cha Yeh Mai Avidle. Well, then there's an extra pasuk. We know how Rabbi Akiva used it. We just don't know how Rabbi Shmuel used it. So the Gemara says, "Limit al bechor balmum shehu matana lekohen shlomatzinu b'chol Torah." We find that when it comes to a bechor that's a balmum, that the kohen still gets it. We learned about this already in Masechta, and it's a big chiddush that it happens. Rabbi Akiva, where does he know that from? He can't use the same pasuk that Rabbi Shmuel does because Rabbi Akiva used l'cha yeh to disprove Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, yaliflei mi besaram. He learns it from the word mi besaram, that a bechor balmum is a matana for the kohen. Chad tam, v'chad balmum, mi besaram, two plural, right? Mi besaram, their fleshes, whatever the right word is, right? So one is a flesh that's tar, one's a flesh that's tamei. They both go to the kohen. That's the chiddush of the plural of besaram. That's the mem. Hi, Rabbi Shmuel. What do you do with mi besaram? No, dahanach bechoros kamar. That's talking specifically about bechoros. The word you're making a diak you shouldn't be making. Not everything that's plural is grounds for inference. Okay, now for the challenging part of the day, which is what are Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva arguing about? Let's go back to our story. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that the only way to shut down Rabbi Yossi Aglili was to quote a pasuk. But why? Says Rabbi Shmuel. After all, if he's right, that he's saying that there's a hekesh to be made from Toda to Bechor, house of cards. Because at the end of the day, Toda was learned from Shlamim. It can't be that Rabbi Akiva holds that there is no Isra of hekesh on top of a hekesh, because that is categorically correct. We know that's true, and we've learned those sugyas. There's no way he argues with that. So, b'mai kamiflage, what is it that they're arguing about? So says the Gemara, Mar Savar, Himenu v'davar, which is actually loosely translated as if there are two things to be learned from a hekesh, Himenu v'davar acher, if you have this and another thing, that's how it would translate. If you have this and another thing to be learned in a hekesh, have a hekesh, that's a proper hekesh, and it would therefore be usher. However, and this is where we get to the inner thinking of Rabbi Akiva, 5 lines from the bottom. Umar Savar, Rabbi Akiva holds that if you only have a partial hekesh, lo habe hekesh. That's not a problem. That's not the prohibition of lamed hekesh mi hekesh. So what he's talking about is that we only have a partial hekesh when it comes to one of the comparisons that he made. And that is as followed. Toda is learned from a hekesh of chaziv v'shok, and that's given to a kohen from the shlamim. What's not discussed is the time limit. So therefore, because there was only a partial hekesh from the world of shlamim, not a full hekesh, so therefore there's no prohibition to learn one hekesh from another. And that is the very dark, very subtle shita, Rabbi Akiva. You're right. In general, if you have a hekesh from A to B, you cannot apply the hekesh from B to C. But Rabbi Akiva holds that if the hekesh from A to B is only a partial hekesh, then the prohibition of extrapolating from A to B to B to C is not problematic at all. So that is what we are talking about. So Mar Savar Heimenu V'Davar acher habe hekesh, that if there's a partial hekesh, that's still a hekesh, and the prohibition of extracting from one to the other is problematic. Umar Sava Rabbi Akiva holds lo habe hekesh. Nope, you're allowed to make that hekesh no problem at all. And therefore, he needed the pasuk of uvisara. That was why Rabbi Akiva brought the pasuk. So they have a machlokas, not about regular hekesh, but about a partial hekesh. That if there is a partial hekesh, you're not allowed, according to Rabbi Shmuel, you're not allowed to extrapolate from A to B to B to C. A partial hekesh is considered a hekesh. Rabbi Akiva holds that a partial hekesh is not a regular hekesh, and therefore you can extrapolate from a partial hekesh A to B, then a full hekesh from B to C, no problem at all. That's why he needed a pasuk to shut him down, and why Rabbi Shmuel thought he was wrong. All right. Now let's try and apply this to two other cases. Bishlam alamanda amar lo have hekesh. I understand the sheet of Rabbi Akiva that you're allowed to learn a partial hekesh from A to B and therefore extend that hekesh from B to C because a partial hekesh is not really a full hekesh. Hainu dichsiv. This explains why the following is true. V'chein ya'aseh le'ohel moed. That the par and shiur of Yom Kippurim, this is what's missing in the Gemara, I'll give you the background. The par v'shal shiur Yom Kippurim was, there was a zrikas adam done by the Aron, and that's in Kodesh HaKodashim, lifnai v'lifnim. And then they went out of that room, the Kohen went out of that room with the blood, and he did something similar by the paroches, which is not lifnai v'lifnim, but rather in the Heichal. So that's what we learn from the V'chein. And kishem shemazil lifnai v'lifnim achas lamala v'sheva lamata midam hapar. Just like we will do a zrika, 1 up and 7 down. This is what we daven on Yom Kippur. Achas ve'achas. This is what we daven. Learn from here. That's true by a par in the Kodesh, in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Kach maza b'heichal. The same thing is true in the Heichal. And uchshem shelifnai v'lifnim achas lamala v'sheva lamata midam hasoir. True by the soir, true in the par. Kach maza b'heichal. Now, the reason why this is considered a partial hekesh is so, I didn't know this until today, this is so subtle, is that by par, it only refers to the 1 zrika, but not the 7. By the sa'ir, it refers to the 7 and not the 1. So there's a hekesh between them. V'chein yaseh brings the two together. That's a partial hekesh. Each one's missing something. So, what?
How is it even a
V'chein. V'chein yaseh le'ohel moed. Yeah. So I presume that's what's happening here. So says the Gemara, I understand Rabbi Akiva because I see a partial hekesh being extended perfectly. No problem at all. Elalamand Amar, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that a partial hekesh is have hekesh. So then, my ikalamemar. How do you learn the brisa? One is over here. It says 1 zrika by par, but not 7. It says 7 zrikos by sa'ir, but not by par. So says the Gemara, no, you're altogether focusing on the wrong thing. Mekomos hu de gamri me'ahadade. According to the one who says that it's have hekesh, then that means you can't learn a partial hekesh. So what then are you learning? He says, I'm not learning a partial hekesh. I'm learning a full hekesh. What does that mean? Mekomos hu de gamri me'ahadade. The v'chein yaseh, what is that teaching me? Mekomos. If it was true in the Kodesh HaKodashim, it's true in the Heichal. So therefore, you can't ask on that. And turning to the top of Nun Zayin Amud Beis, Be'ibai Seima says the Gemara, Chutz mipnim b'chad zimna gamir. This is very difficult. He says chutz outside of. It's really referring to the Heichal. This chutz is outside of the chutz here means outside of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Chutz mipnim b'chad zimna gamir. It was learned at one time. So there's a long Rashi here. There's a long Tosfos here. In short, it's a similar answer to the previous one with a slight difference, which is that we're learning a comparison between one to the other. We'll have to leave that for here because it's a very, very complex line of the Gemara. So all that was case number 1, and therefore we tried to pressure test this machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. We tried. We couldn't find a real hole in either of their shitas. Both of them had valid answers. Let's try again. Bishlam alaman de amar, and my gosh, the word lo is missing. You can't miss the word lo. That's just too big of a word to miss. Bishlam alaman de amar lo have hekesh. That's what the Hagos Habachir adds. Bishlam alaman de amar lo. Although that is subject to a conversation. because not everyone agrees to that. But I don't understand the Gemara without this. We'd have to spend more time to understand the other way. But Bishlam Alaman Damar Lo Have Hekesh, according to Rabbi Akiva, that when there is a partial Hekesh, you're still allowed to learn to another Hekesh. Hainu Dichsiv Mimosh Vosechem Taviu Lechem Tenufa. Talking about the din of Lechem. She'ein Talmud Lomar Taviu. I don't need the word Taviu. Ma Talmud Lomar Taviu. Why was it there? Kol She'ata Mevi Mimakom Acher Harehu Kazel. Bringing it from one place to another is like this one. What is this talking about? Ma lehalan, just like over there, and we don't know what that means without help, but what it means is in regards to the shtei halechem, which were brought on Shavuos, ma lehalan isaron lechala. Each challah that was brought, there were 40 chalos that were brought, each one had a volume of flour of an isaron, a tenth of, I think an ephah would be the volume. Afkan, over here, by our case, by regular chalos, so then the halacha should be isar on the challah. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Imalahalan, but in another case, where we are talking about the Toda, so there, ilahalan shnei esronim, afkan shnei esronim, then it should also be true over here by the lachmi Toda, that it should also be shnei esronim per loaf. Talmud Lomar Tihiena. We have that extra word Tihiena, which teaches us, that we're talking about the volume of 1 isaron per challah. Now, what we're talking about here is not the volume of chalos, but the volume of flour in any one challah. So therefore, says the Gemara, all of that is stage 1, is the volume per challah. Here's stage 2. Vilamadnu asara lechametz. We learn 10 from chametz. Asara lematzah minayin. How do we know that we need 10 matzos? Talmud Lomar, al chalas lechem chametz. Neged chametz haba matzah. Similar to the 10 by the chametz. That's how we know how many matzahs to bring, which is 10. So this is a long way of saying that according to Rabbi Akiva, I understand these are partial hekeshim because it's not full. One part of the hekesh teaches me about the volume per challah. The other part of the hekesh teaches me about the number of chalos. So therefore, partial, no problem. I'm allowed to make those hekeshim. Elalaman de Amar, and here they added low in the parentheses, it's a mistake. Elalaman de Amar have a hekesh, that no, even partial hekeshim cannot be learned out. Ma'ika lemeimar. How then do you learn? He said 100%. You're right, that would be problematic. And Rabbi Shmuel couldn't handle that. He says, don't worry. Taviu yiserahi. The word taviu is actually extra, according to his limud, and therefore I'm able to use it so that it overrides the hekesh concerns. Now it's not a hekesh anymore, it's a drasha. Very complex Gemara. This requires a good couple of hours of research. Very difficult Gemara. But the short of it is that this nuance that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva have. Many blot ago we learned that if you have a hekesh from A to B, you cannot have a hekesh from B to C. Everyone agrees to that. How can Rabbi Akiva say what he said, fighting back to Rabbi Yossi Aglili? The answer is that we missed a subtlety, and that's what the Gemara was then talking about, is this very subtle machlokas. You're right. If there's a hekesh from A to B, I cannot learn a hekesh from B to C. But if there's only a partial hekesh from A to B, can I then learn from B to C? Rabbi Akiva says no problem. No problem. Because a partial hekesh is not a full hekesh. And therefore you can learn from A to B and B to C. Masha'enkin, Rabbi Shmuel holds that a partial hekesh is also a hekesh, and therefore a partial hekesh is also a hekesh, and therefore you cannot learn a partial hekesh from A to B and B to C. And the two cases we tried to pressure test, they navigated. Beautiful. Halfway down on Zayin Amud Beis, let's continue. Pesach eino ne'echal mantana. What did we say? We said the Pesach can only be eaten until, I'll just read the whole line of the Mishnah. Pesach eino ne'echal ela b'layla, has to be eaten at night. Eino ne'echal ad chatzos, till midnight, not halachic midnight. Eino ne'echal ela limnuya, you have to be a part of the chabura. Eino ne'echal ela, it has to be roasted. So let's see the Gemara. Mantana. Who's the author of our Mishnah? So it says the Gemara, Amar of Yosef, Rebbe Lazar ben Azariah. Rebbe Lazar ben Azariah is the author of our Mishnah. D'Tanya, how do we know? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah Omer, Ne'emar kan balayla hazeh, v'ne'emar lehalon ve'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim balayla hazeh. Ma lehalon ad chatzos, by makas bechoros, that's talking about chatzos halayla. Afkan, when it comes to our zman achila of the Korban Pesach, ad chatzos. So therefore, our Mishnah must be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Our Mishnah says chatzos. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's drushes teach us chatzos from makas bechoros. Very good. Amar le Rabbi Akiva. Wait a second. V'halo kvar nemar. We have another pasuk. V'achaltem oso b'chipazon. Ad sha'as chipazon. Until the time of chipazon. Take a look at Rashi. 7 lines before the end of the page in Rashi. Dibra maskal ad sha'as chipazon. Sheim nechpazon laleches. V'hainu le'or haboker. Kidichsi v'atem lo setu ish mipesach beso. Ad boker. Remember, Makas Bechoros started at Chatzos. The Yidden weren't allowed to leave their homes until morning. So when the pasuk says, Rabbi Akiva points out, that's got to be talking about when they left there. It's not Chatzos. It's the morning. So it says the Gemara, Im Kain ma tamalamar balayla hazeh. So why does it say at night? He explains. I might have thought that it's like all other types of kachim that can be eaten during the day. Tamalamar balayla. Balayla nechal, veino nechal b'yom. So Rabbi Akiva says, all night long it's mutter. No limit of chatzos. Says the Gemara, Amar le Abaye. If that's true, Mimayde Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah ude oraisa. Me'echa teisi that the din of our Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and it's a din de oraisa that you have to stop eating the korban pesach by chatzos. Dilma de Rabbanan. Maybe our Mishnah is like the shita of the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And it's not a din d'oraisa, but the limiter of chatzos by korban pesach is ulaharchik min ha'avera, just to prevent a person from not eating the korban pesach bisman. Says the Gemara, no. Ma'in kain ella ad chatzos. Beautiful diak from our Mishnah. That our Mishnah says ve'inu nechal ella ad chatzos. Our Mishnah could have said ve'inu nechal ad chatzos. Ella ad chatzos. Oh, the extra language of ella ki hasam. Ma hasam deoraisa, afkan nami deoraisa. And therefore, the korban pesach can only, our Mishnah has to be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. There is a shita that you can eat a korban pesach till morning. Maskim. But here the Gemara says that our Mishnah must be like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Hadron alach ezu makoma, and Baruch Hashem, we finished the 5th parak of Maseches, Zevachim, the only parak in Shas that has no machlokos in the Tanaim, at least in the Mishnais. In the Gemara, we just saw big machlokos between multiple sets of Tanaim. But in the Mishnais, there isn't one. Here's Hashem, we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Wishing you all a beautiful night.